So I've spent over 1,500 hours flying World War II fighters in my home simulator setup. Mainly the Spitfire, the P-51 Mustang, the Bf-109 and the FW-190. Chasing one thing, trying to get as close as possible to what flying these incredible aircraft might actually feel like. Now, I recently headed down to Goodwood Aerodrome for a fantastic opportunity to fly the Spitfire simulator at Hangar 8 with Spitfires.com. This is a company that trains real-world Spitfire pilots, provides simulator tuition and ultimately offers dual-seat Spitfire experiences. And it got me thinking, how does this compare to my current home setup? And what could I learn from it to apply to my own real-world flying? Because while both experiences are brilliant, they're built to teach and deliver subtly different things. Now, one of the amazing things about DCS is freedom. You can jump in, take off, dogfight, crash, respawn and go again. And that's brilliant. It gives you access to aircraft scenarios and combinations of flying that simply aren't realistically accessible to most people in the real world. But what it doesn't teach in the same way is discipline. Because in the real world, where these instructors are preparing pilots for actual flying, there's no respawn button. And that really hit home for me in the Spitfire simulator. Having an instructor behind me, talking through real procedures and manoeuvres, completely changes the mindset. This simulator isn't built for casual entertainment. It exists to help prepare and train pilots in procedures, emergencies and aircraft handling. And as I've progressed with my own real-world flying, that contrast stands out more and more. A lot of the flying fundamentals absolutely transfer though. Flying coordinated, watching the ball, managing turns, basic aircraft handling, that all feels familiar. But the procedural discipline, that was another level. Being in that environment with an instructor brings that home immediately. And then there's the physical side of the experience. At home, my setup is incredibly immersive. VR is fantastic because once the headset goes on, you disappear into another world. You genuinely feel transported somewhere else. But the Goodwood simulator is immersive in a different way. Because instead of virtually being somewhere else, you're physically somewhere else. You walk up the wing, you step into the cockpit, you operate real physical controls. You see gauges shaking and vibrating with the engine haptics. You pull the canopy over your head. You have the perspex right next to your face. And that changes the experience massively. It doesn't just feel like a simulation, it feels like being somewhere with real purpose. And one area that I was particularly interested in was the control feel. The stick forces between the two setups felt remarkably similar. Both had excellent force feedback, which was reassuring. The manoeuvring feel was also surprisingly similar, but the immersive feeling around the manoeuvring was different. At home, I'm immersed because VR convinces my brain I'm somewhere else. At Goodwood, I'm immersed because I physically am somewhere else, sitting in an actual cockpit. It's hard to explain until you experience both. One thing I'd wondered beforehand was whether the pivot in the middle of the real Spitfire control column would stand out compared to my own setup. Because my rig doesn't replicate that, partly because of complexity, partly because of space constraints. I genuinely thought I might notice that as immersion braking, but I didn't notice it at all, which was a nice surprise. The brake felt noticeably stiffer in the real-world simulator. That's something I'll probably tweak on my own setup. And even the brake sound stood out. The real aircraft brake noise is much more pronounced. So Eagle Dynamics, if you're listening, there's some feedback there. One thing I found fascinating was the rudder pedal fitting. On the simulator, and apparently on real Spitfires too, there's a small amount of play. Now in home simulation, if something has a bit of slop or movement in it, we'd immediately assume it's worn out. But in this case, that movement is normal. And that was an interesting lesson, because in home simulation, we often chase perfection, perfect tolerances, perfect stiffness, perfect feel. But in doing that, you may actually be moving away from realism. So where my home setup absolutely excels is situational awareness and flexibility. Because what I do at home is different. I fly combat missions, dogfighting, tracking aircraft, looking over my shoulder, head constantly moving, full 360 awareness. And that's where VR is unbelievably powerful. Because with projection-based simulation, eventually you run out of screen. Whereas in VR, you're fully surrounded. And as for the kind of flying I enjoy, that makes a real difference. One thing this experience did make me think about is mixed reality. Now I know mixed reality is already here. There are already some impressive examples out there, particularly with systems like the Quest 3 in physical cockpits. So this isn't me pretending it doesn't exist. What stood out for me was the difference between full VR flexibility and the physical authenticity of a dedicated cockpit environment. My home setup is flexible. I can jump from a Spitfire to a Piper Cub, from DCS combat flying to VATSIM procedural flying. That flexibility is one of VR's biggest strengths. The Goodwood simulator is purpose-built, and because of that, it excels in procedural realism, failure simulation, training and authenticity. Could that kind of setup be transformed with mixed reality? Potentially, yes. But one challenge is the physical reality of sitting in the cockpit with a canopy very close to your head, as current headset form factors could make that very awkward. And honestly, the physical canopy being right there was one of my favourite parts of the Spitfires.com simulator. My Pimax OLED also doesn't have pass-through cameras, so there are practical limitations, but it's something I'm very interested in exploring. Especially with the preview of the new XR2 chip that will enable really low latency pass-through, so you can see the cockpit in front of you, and have form factor almost like glasses with OLED screens in, so definitely one to watch there. So, which did I prefer? That's the wrong question, because both experiences are fantastic, just for very different reasons. My home simulator setup gives me incredible flexibility, and lately I've been enjoying flying the Piper Cub, tuning stick forces through the FFB software to tailor the experience, and the setup works brilliantly for that too. It's flexible and it's immersive. The Spitfires.com simulator serves a completely different purpose. It's purpose-built for procedural training and learning, whilst also giving members of the public an incredible experience. Yes, it gives people an amazing sense of what flying a Spitfire might actually be like. But more importantly, it helps prepare real-world pilots before they take charge of priceless pieces of living history. And where you experience that environment, with the instructors, the procedures and the discipline involved, you come away with a real appreciation for what goes into keeping those aircraft and the people flying them safe. I'll add links to Spitfires.com, the Spitfire Academy, in the description if you'd like to check them out. And thank you all the team there for their time during the day. It was an amazing experience on the unique equipment they have there, and I thoroughly recommend it to anyone. It'd be great to hear your thoughts in the comments. Which setup appeals to you more, and where do you think simulation goes next? And with that, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the skies.